Hey everyone, my name is Monica Isabel Martinez, and I'm going to be walking you through how to leverage the use of Google Sites to do projects, whether you're in person or you're doing remote work. Some of you might even have a hybrid model. Maybe you have kids in your classroom, and then some that are connecting digitally. So here's really some ideas. Here's some ideas that I'm going to share with you that hopefully will help you do some collaborative group work and some project work while still being in these sort of mashed up different learning environments. So what you see on my screen here is a Google slide deck, and I want to show you how you can leverage the use of Google Slides for project and brainstorming and group work, because a lot of times we think Google Slides is mostly used for presentations, but there's so many other uses for this tool, and I'm going to share this workbook with you here. So before I actually jump in to show you what I have in this workbook and what I've built, I do want to share with you sort of the way that I've hacked the use of this particular slide deck into more of a working document. So first thing, I'm going to go over to slide up at the very top. In here in slide, this is where you normally would add a new slide and so forth. Well, in this drop-down menu, you'll also find the Edit Master section. And I absolutely took advantage of all of the master features of the slides to be able to give you what you see on your screen. So for example, right now, what you have in the center on Canvas, so that's what we have here is our slide, right? That's our canvas, where you see user feedback, what do you like, and then these little dots that create my grid here. If you notice, when I click and drag over this section, I'm not able to highlight anything. And that's because I've used my master slides to put this content there so that when people are actually on the slide itself, they can't actually move this grid. They can't edit this text or move that text or anything like that. And that's important because the use of this particular slide is meant for me to be able to add these sticky notes onto these different 6 boxes on the screen. But if you're dragging and dropping and moving things around, the last thing you want is for your main grid and your main content to be dragged around, because then it just creates a mess. And so that is why I'm leveraging the use of my master slides to create that content that's just going to be stuck and glued to the artboard so that people can't move it. So that was one thing I wanted to share with you. And the second thing, which you've probably already noticed just by looking at my screen here, this over here is my main artboard, right? Like this slide, the information on the slide is what you would see if I was presenting, but we're not actually going to use slides to present. We're instead going to use it as a workbook. Therefore, I have a lot of extra space off Canvas so that all of this stuff that you see on here over to the left-hand side as well as to the right-hand side, none of that is on our artboard, but there's space there for us to leverage. And that's what I've done here in this example. All right, so those are the two things I wanted to share with you, is using your master slides and then also using the space that is off the artboard. So let me backtrack and show you what I have built here. So I do a lot of projects with teachers as well as with students on design thinking. And in the past, when we were able to get together in person and do in-person trainings, we could do a lot of the brainstorming work in person, face-to-face, get feedback from other people, show them our work and so forth. And we would use like sticky notes, and we would use, pen, paper, and all that kind of good stuff. And, as the person doing the project, you'd walk away with all these notes and all this stuff. But of course, now that we're connecting virtually, that's definitely a challenge, or at least we need to shift, right? We need to change the way in which we think about how we're going to do that same very thing. And so last year, we did a big design thinking project along with the Google Innovator programs. And so we had to rethink the way we were doing what we'd normally do in person. So we came up with these ideas for these workbooks. And so here you see just a title page. And again, the very top portion here, I've added to my master slide, so I can't actually edit or move that. Instead, I can come down here as the person in doing this project in this slide deck. I can actually change this to add my name, right? So these 3 here are editable on purpose, but I don't want you to be able to change those. So that's our opening slide. And then of course, People love to decorate their own slides and all that kind of good stuff. And so all of my participants, all of my users, all of my students, they're each going to get a copy of this workbook in when they actually get started, right? And that's what you'd be doing as well if you're using something like this. So they would put their info here. And then slide number 2, the idea here is that they're presenting their project to users. So whether it be a product or a service or an idea, they're going to present that to users. And that's what we would do normally in person with a group of 4 to 6 people. But to do that digitally, what I've done here is created this template to where we have the questions we want to answer. So if I was the person presenting, I want my users to be able to answer these 6 questions. So what do you like? What do you not like? What would you change, etc. And so what I would do here at this point would be to launch either in a Google Meet, I could present my product or talk about let's say my website. I could share my screen and share the website. If it's an idea, I could talk through the idea, etc. So I'm presenting this information to the users. Then what I have my users do is to come to my slide deck. So I would share this particular presentation by going to the share button there and then sharing this with all of those different people. So I would actually have their accounts to be able to add them to the slide deck. You can, of course, share this with anyone can edit with the link if you don't want to have to add their names individually. So either way, but you're sharing the slide deck with those users. Once those users come in here, your instructions are to tell them basically to add their names here to each of the different sections. So you have 4 users that are going to review your product or idea, etc. So they would write their name here where it says student 1. And then as you can see, there are 6 different boxes for those different questions, and they each have 6 different sticky notes. So think of this as in-person sticky notes. I, as the user, I'm walking around with my sticky notes and a pencil and jotting down notes, and then I'm going to give you feedback on those 6 different things. Digitally, we've created these sticky notes, and it's really simple to do this. They kind of look like sticky notes because we made them, square and yellow, and then just gave it a little drop shadow within the feature. So I'm going to show you really quick by simply coming up to the top, selecting shape, and you just create like a little box there. And then we changed it to yellow. And in this case, you could do yellow outline or no outline. And then when you have this selected, over here on the right-hand side, there are 3 little dots. And then format options is what I'm going to select to then say, I want a drop shadow. So you check that. It gives you a drop shadow. And you can also decide how far you want that drop shadow. If you want it to, really pop, I'm adding more drop shadow there, how transparent you want it, etc. So you can make those edits there, but you can see here, it's adding that little drop shadow. So, I mean, that's just kind of sort of a little graphical element, but the idea is that we're wanting to really give this kind of a sticky note feel. And then you can, of course, grab it from the corner to resize that as needed. Now, sometimes I get asked the question in using this workbook, but like, oh my gosh, they're so tiny. Like, how are your users going to be able to see that, etc.? Well, if I am the student for, let's say, student 1 up here, not a lot of people use this, but there is a zoom tool within Google Slides allowing you to, let's say, zoom into 200. And because all I need to work on are mine over here, then I can simply come in here and type my notes. Even though this is a small font, and when we zoom back out to fit into screen, it looks a lot smaller. It's actually not that small. So use that zoom feature to be able to toggle in and out, to be able to get the full view as you see here, or to zoom in to be able to type into the different sections. All right, so really quick, so just again, to sort of give you the idea of the workflow here. So I, as the designer of this project or idea, etc., I'm presenting to my audience either via Google Meet, or perhaps I've pre-recorded that and I've sent a link to this video so they've watched this video, or I could even drop in the video into a slide on its own so that they could watch it in the previous slide and then come to this slide with me together on a Google Meet. To then be able to organize and talk through, like, how we're going to give feedback and so forth. So let's say we've asked our users to give feedback. They've already, listened to my pitch. They're giving feedback, so they're typing away in these little sticky notes. Once they've typed all of their feedback, they now have to drag their sticky notes. So each of these are squares. Remember, they're like shapes. So all they have to do is grab and drag those into the sections where they belong. So here it says, what do you like? So if that one had a comment on something I liked, then I would put the sticky note there. If it had a comment on how it made me feel, I would put the sticky note over here. So they can drag and drop those wherever they belong. And I do have an example here for you in that once all of your users have dragged and dropped all of their sticky notes, this is what it would look like in the end. And so as the designer myself, looking back, I now have this feedback that's been organized into each of those different questions by my actual users. And you'll notice that one thing that I did initially, when you saw the initial example here, you'll notice that up here at the top, I just put that sticky note back. Notice that I did put a bounding box with the same colors as the sticky notes, because as your users are putting in their name here, that really helps me. Once they've dragged all their sticky notes, I know who actually made those comments. So when we're together in a sync or even afterwards, I can actually select that particular box there and add a comment if I wanted to, so that person, and I would tag that person and say, okay, Monica, you said the following, etc. Can you clarify? I didn't quite understand. Or while we're together in person, still in that meet, I'll know that yellow sticky note came from Monica, or that this blue one came from Isabel, or that this purple one came from Ivan. So I can actually tell by the colors, and that's why I put a color bounding box around those names. So this really helps me because now all of these sticky notes are organized, right? Like I get to actually see what people are saying about what and what they thought about those individual things. And that at that point, I'm pretty much done with my users. Now I'm going to reflect on all of this feedback, and I'm going to use my next template, which is my feedback grid. Now, in our feedback grid, what we would normally do is have this printed on paper, and we would basically reflect on all those sticky notes. And so now we have a digital grid here that you see on your screen. And once again, what I've done is these dotted lines to create the grid, plus the sections, what worked, ideas, changes, new questions. All of that section there, you'll notice, again, I'm going to click and drag here. I cannot select or move any of those items because I've added that to my master. Instead, the only thing I can change are the boxes that are placed here in each section, placed there on purpose so that you can actually add your reflection. So I have an example here. What I've done is I grabbed those sticky notes and I categorize them now in like, what did they say as far as what worked well? What did they say as far as what changes I might need to make? And what did they say in regards to et cetera, et cetera? So I just dropped in my sticky notes there next to those sections so that I could look at those and then reflect on that learning. So here what I'm doing is I'm now taking all that feedback and summarizing my understanding and really like fully digesting the feedback into a synopsis. So that's the idea here in this feedback grid. And then the last thing that we would be doing in this section normally when we're working on projects is to have our user, the designer create a user testing reflection. So after going through all of that, after presenting your product or service to users and getting their feedback and then categorizing that feedback, now I'm going to reflect on really the whole thing. And so this is almost like what you would be turning in as, sort of like the whole synopsis of the entire user testing activity. And so what you do is you identify what the goal was to begin with your user testing, right? Like what was it that you were trying to accomplish? And usually this would have been written ahead of time. So you would already have the goal, you would already have the participants, because obviously those are your users. But the idea here is that you would fill in this section identifying, what the goal was, who were the participants, and in that sense, it's really, who are your users, who is it that you're testing, and you're specific, like this is the age group, this is the gender, this is the et cetera, right? So you're being very specific about your participants. And obviously in this process, you now have your findings and your next steps. So the idea here is to summarize all of your findings into now one chunk. So you're scaling down. You're trying to focus in, which is what we're doing in this entire process. And then what your next steps are going to be to make your product or service or tool or idea better, right? So we're scaling down. We're doing so it's kind of like divergent and convergent thinking, right? So we started big in that we're presenting this product and we're getting all this feedback from all of our different users. And then we start, narrowing that down by categorizing that into four categories, and then summarizing that information. And here's an example of how that might look. Summarizing that, all of that detail, all of that information, so that we have very clear next steps. You might not be doing project-based learning. You might not be doing design thinking projects. Even though this is the example I'm presenting to you here, I want to point out that what I want you to take away from this more than anything else is the use of the side, areas that aren't a part of your main canvas, right? Leveraging that and the fact that you can create this kind of an environment where students are giving feedback to something, where students are answering questions, having that interaction, seeing what other students are putting in there, and they all have, sort of their sections. And that allows sort of that collaborative nature, but in a brainstorming sort of environment where your students are getting to participate. So I really like that flexibility about this. And let me jump in. I'm going to go to slide and I'm going to go to Edit Master. For those of you not familiar with, or if you haven't used your master slides, I highly recommend you explore and you get familiar with the features here. So what I did in the layout section, this is where I added my text. I formatted my text as well. So the font, the color, all that kind of good stuff. I set all of that stuff up here. And anything that I wasn't going to want my users and my students to edit, I basically added here. And once I was done with that, I came up here to the top and I said rename, and then I titled it. So I called this one User Testing Reflection. And then here's the other one. This is the feedback grid that you saw that had these four categories with the dotted lines. So I created this here. So this is just a line, but it happens to be a dotted line. And then these are graphics that were brought in, and then this is just text, right? Once I'm done laying out my work, and here I do want to point something out, something extra. See that it says feedback grid over here? You can also add content off the grid, even in your master slide. So I took advantage of that here on the side, because unlike my other master slides, I had room here to put the main titles of these, but not for this one, for this grid, because I really wanted the users, or the designer in this case, to be able to use the entire space for writing their feedback. So I put the title off the grid here, or off the artboard, right, off canvas. And then again, all you do is rename, and this one I called feedback grid. So I named these because what happens is when you're in your slide deck, so we're back in our main slide here. So when I create a new slide, so I'm just going to do slide, new slide, and it's going to adhere to what was there because I did it right under slide one. So it thinks that I want it to look just like slide one, which is why it has that, and I can't delete that. Instead, don't worry about that, because instead what we're going to do when we have slide two selected is we're going to come up here to the top, select slide, and notice in the drop-down menu you have an option for apply layout. Now this is why it was important for us to name, right? We were renaming our different layouts, because now we get to choose, well, which layout are you wanting to use? And so if I was intending to use the feedback grid here, then all I have to do is select that. and voila, it changed that layout to that feedback grid. And you can see that text over here. And once again, I cannot select or do anything to any of those items that are there. So that's how you set up your master slides. Now, when you are in the master, let me just go back over one more time because I do want to show you something. So it gives you all these extra slides here over on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side. And so I'm just going to go to one I haven't used yet. So this has this text here that says click to edit master title style here. I actually don't want that. So I'm going to select it and get rid of it. And instead, what I want to do is I want to set up this particular slide with something different, right? So we're starting this as if it were from scratch. I happen to have an image I want to use for this. And it's just like this graphic that I've created to be able to drop in a video on top here. So I'm just going to stretch this out a little from the corners, keeping my dimensions intact for the graphic. So give me 1 second while I do that. Okay, so there's my graphic. And I'm going to come back up here. So on some of these, you'll notice like here, like where it says, that one says, what do you like? All these say something different, right? And so what I'm going to do for this one, I'm going to end up putting, the idea is to put a video here, but obviously I'm not going to do it from here. I want each student to put in their own video, and then we're going to do a reflection on here. So the last thing I have to do on this page is to rename this, and I'm going to call this video slide, and then okay. All right, now I can click the X located up here at the top right. I'm going to click that. It's going to close that out. And now that I'm here on this second slide, I really don't want this feedback grid. I'm going to go to slide once again, apply layout, and now I'm looking for that video slide, which you see is right here. So I'm going to select that. It's going to drop it in for me. There it is. And now when students come to their copy of this workbook on slide 2, they're going to see this graphic. And once again, I can't select, drag it, delete it, or anything like that. Of course, if your students have edit rights to this template, they can, of course, go into the master and mess with it, but it's not as likely. We tend to not go into the master slide deck unless we're purposely trying to go in there to change something. And obviously, if you're using this with your students, you're going to tell them this is the template I want you to use. You have flexibility in things you're adding, but I don't want you to mess with the questions and the grid and that kind of stuff. So there's some still a lot of flexibility to be creative and be able to really customize what you're adding and putting in. But then there are components that you're using as the template. So I'm just going to guide you here through. If we were using this as a video, I could go to insert and go video because I want to add a video there. And so I would just come in here and find my video and then add it. I'm going to cancel that. And then I could put the video box right in the screen section. And we could use the right-hand side to have students maybe leave a bit of information. So maybe what we're doing there, I'm just going to grab this text box here really quick, since there's already something on there. Perhaps we want the student to put some information here. Let me get rid of that. And then maybe we say synopsis of project. All right, so this is now ready so that when the student gets their copy, they're going to replace that and put their title there and then the synopsis right below it, which sits there, and then the video would be here. And voila, like you've now you've seen the process of how I've been creating these different slides that are templates for this particular project workbook. Again, even if you're not doing projects, I feel that these slides, I've actually used slides like this for different purposes. They're not always about, these project-based learning or design thinking projects. It could be something way smaller, or really you're just getting together with your students and you're doing some feedback, you're doing brainstorming stuff. Perhaps you've just read or seen something or had something assigned that you're now reflecting on. And a lot of these templates are certainly applicable to that kind of collaboration and brainstorming together. So hopefully you guys find these useful. And if anything else, what I hope that you take away from this is that you start to leverage the space that is outside of your Canvas as well as your master slides. best of luck with everything you guys are doing that are that's within our current situation as far as remote and hybrid and face to face, all that stuff. I wish you guys the best, and hopefully you guys are out there just killing it. Good luck.